Welcome to today's live stream. Today we're going to be talking about the elements of SJW comic books and why they don't work. I'm going to take a minute to let everybody know if the stream is going on. Okay. Okay, just need a minute. Okay, just need a minute to get this stream. All right, the live stream will be getting ready to go on in a minute. I'm just going to kind of let everybody know that it's going on. And okay. What's up, Luciano Casanova? Hi, I am EDB Vlogs. Trying to just wait a couple minutes, trying to get my the link up, let everybody know where the stream is going on. Then I will get started in a minute. So, hello, Batman. Batman is in the live stream. Fun. Okay, I'm gonna start doing the live stream right about now. And this live stream is going to be about SJW comics. And I'm going to deconstruct some of the elements of what makes an SJW comic a SJW comic and why these elements just don't work. Now, SJW stands for Social Justice Warrior. And your social justice warrior usually is one of these leftists who believe in these very liberal policies, and they have an ideology that they want to promote in comic books. And they want to use the comic book medium as the way to promote their far left ideals and promote their far left politics. And that's what is the core foundation of an SJW comic, is that it is not a platform that is used for storytelling. It is a platform used to promote a political agenda for far leftists. And that's one of the reasons why many SJW comics just don't really do very well in the marketplace, is because they are mostly propaganda. And that's not what most comic book readers want to see in a comic book, because usually the whole idea of the SJW is they think that comic books are meant to be political because of the old history of comics in World War II. But because these people have not done any sort of research, they don't understand the complete story as related to comic books in World War II. Now, yes, comic books during World War II were used as a platform for promoting ideas like superheroes taking on Adolf Hitler and helping out in the war. And some of them were used in a way to promote a certain type of narrative that is very pro-America, but that nationalism was not the main focus of the comics of World War II. And this is where the SJW really gets it twisted, because what they don't understand is, yes, comics make political commentary about the period of a time, but usually most comics are objective and in their commentary in most cases. Usually they are a reflection of the times, and they usually just go out here and they present what is reflected in the outside world. But your SJW, they don't understand this, and what they want to do is they want to take the American comic book and turn it into a propaganda platform for their political agenda. And that's the primary thing that makes an SJW comic book an SJW comic. Now, the other thing that usually winds up making SJW comics SJW comics, in addition to the politics of the writers and editors, what makes an SJW comic an SJW comic is the fact that many of the people who work on these comics usually don't really know anything about comic books. For example, you have Sana Amanat, who is the vice president of Marvel Comics, but she has never really worked anywhere in trade publishing. So she has next to no trade publishing experience. Usually, she originally came from politics. She was part of the Obama administration in some way, shape, or form, but she had no real connection to comic books outside of working 2 years at the Virgin Comics, and that really wasn't enough experience to be promoted all the way to vice president. So she sees comics as a way to push her leftist political agenda and push her so-called diversity. But in actuality, her so-called diversity really does not really give us any sort of objective picture regarding diversity, because when you look at many SJW comics, they are not really about diversity. They're all about promoting stereotypes. Now, that's the other thing that's very important about many of these so-called SJW books, is that they oftentimes breathe brand new life into old stereotypes, because when it comes down to many far leftists, they want to live in the smooth world. And the smooth world is a place where people, yes, there are people of all races and colors, but they all fit into certain boxes. And those boxes are created so that the white people at the top can feel comfortable about everybody else's place at the bottom. And when it comes down to the SJW, they only have one place for Black people, and that place is usually at the bottom of the world. And that's the place that shows the racism many of these SJWs have, even though they profess to be so tolerant and so understanding of people all over the world. But once you take a look inside of their comics, you clearly see the racism they present in their stories. And diversity in comics, Richard C. Meyer, he talks about this on the regular as related to many of the things they present in their comics, like the Gordon Goodbrother character, this emasculated beta male Black man who is just there to validate the white characters and there to bootlick the white characters. He is basically nothing more than a neutered Uncle Tom, and he's just there to be like a butler to many of the white characters and basically let those white characters feel like they're not racist. So that's the basic thing that the Gordon Goodbrother character does. And when it relates to the Black females that are around these SJW characters, they usually either play the soulful saint, which is basically another version of the mammy, who is there again to emotionally validate the white characters and be this asexualized type female who is basically there just to make that woman feel good. Because oftentimes, when it comes down to many of these SJW comics, they often are presented from a very gynocentric perspective. And this is the thing that people need to understand about your SJW comics is a lot of people, they always think that it comes from white men. No, this is white female gynocentrism in these comics. And that's the main foundation of the SJW comic, is that we are getting this racism from the gynocentric perspective. And these SJWs, they want to present the whole idea of tolerance, but when you look at the pages of their comics, they just show you how racist they truly are, with the Gordon Good brothers, the Soulful Saints, and the other character that these gynocentrists use, the black female lesbian. Now, the black female lesbian is a character that the SJWs bring in because they don't like the idea of a black woman being the equal of a white woman. And what they want to do to degrade the black woman in the comics is make this black woman a lesbian so that she cannot be seen as more attractive than the white female. It's no different than what the SJWs do when they go out here and make the black woman obese, because that's another thing that white women like to do to make black women look less attractive. They used to do it in films like Imitation of Life. Is, again, they take the black female, yes, they'll put her in the film passively, but aggressively, what they're going to do is make that female appear to be less attractive than the white female. George Roberts, I'm going to check to see what's going on. I don't know if something's wrong with the if something's wrong with the connection, I'll try to check it out. You guys still there? Just want to make sure. I'll just try to see what I can do. If it's buffering, let me check my connection. Okay. I think we're still, but that's what they do. The white females, they, oh, good morning, Chris. He's always on the West Coast. I guess it is because the SJWs on YouTube, they don't like it when you talk about their racism, but this is what they're putting into their comic books. And you can see it in the comics because, again, whenever they give you an image of a black woman, it's the Soulful Saint or it's this lesbian. And this is something we see on the regular in their comics. This is a core element of their comics. Good morning, Yak Diesel. Are you from the West Coast? But these are elements that are in your SJW comics. And yeah, Brother Cap, I did see the articles about Captain Marvel being a feminist film. And that just cements it in my mind. It's a film we need to not go out and see. And that's the thing that these people want to do. They don't care about losing money. All they want to do is push their agenda. Good morning, Morpheus. He used to live in my old neighborhood. So we have actually met and talked to each other a couple months ago. So, but when it comes down to these SJWs, they, again, want to promote their agendas in the comics, and they also want to promote them in movies like Captain Marvel. But these people have literally hijacked the entire business of Marvel Comics, and they've also started to infiltrate companies like Image, DC Comics, and they want to come in the comic book industry. They want to talk about this so-called diversity, but when you take a critical look at many of these companies where these SJWs are, you see all of these pink-haired and blue-haired white women, but you don't see many other people working there. So you don't see any sort of black men outside of a beta, like your Ta Negro coats or as a Ta-Nehisi coats, who go out here and promote a social justice agenda. And you don't see much qualified talent working at comic companies because most people who don't follow their politics, they're not let in the door, because the only qualification you would need to work at a comic company these days is not your penciling skills, your writing skills, your artistic skills, or your creative vision. No, those don't matter as long as you lean to the far left and are pushing a leftist political agenda. As long as you go in that route, you are considered qualified to work in SJW comics, and you are qualified to be a part of the companies that publish SJW comics. So that's the only qualification you need to make these comics. And again, these comics are all about pushing a political agenda, and they're not about story. And because you have grossly unqualified people creating these comics, usually this is why these comics are so terrible. And I can, after reading numerous issues of SJW comics, I can tell you what all the elements of your SJW comics. And the core element, again, was the politics, but there's also the story elements of all, because when it comes down to your SJW creators, they don't have any sort of understanding of story model. So the SJW story model is just no story model at all. And that having no structure, that leads to them trying to just wrap their politics around a form, and then the form completely collapsing because it has no structure. Now, the other element of your SJW comic is that they always try to push a so-called diversity character. Now, usually this diversity character is usually based primarily on an ethnicity, like your America Chavez or your Sam Wilson Falcon. And it's all about them either being Black, being Hispanic, being Asian, or being a woman. And it's not about the character having any sort of internal character traits that the reader can relate to or identify with. And because the characters don't have any sort of internal character traits that the reader can relate to or identify with, usually this is why many SJW comics are so one-dimensional, because in order for us to connect with a character, we need things like depth and layers. And it's those things that allow us to identify with the character's experience and make us care about the character enough to continue going out and buying their comics on the regular. And when it comes down to your SJW comics, they don't give us anything outside of race, gender, or sexuality. And that's just not enough to create a compelling story for the reader. So this is a big problem for the SJW creator. But because the SJW creator usually does not want to take any sort of criticism related to their lack of experience as a writer, this is one of the reasons why the stories never change and the stories never really grow, because when it comes down to these SJW creators, they believe they're making the greatest thing since sliced bread, when all they're actually doing in most cases is making a mess. And that mess usually, again, is because their stories are just so one-dimensional. Now, the other thing that's related to an SJW comic that makes them so bad is the fact that you have this inexperienced writer with no talent, no skills, and a huge ego. And what they do is they want to write these characters that are so-called diversity characters, but then they don't want to do any sort of research. And this is another big problem I would see in many SJW comics, is that they don't do any sort of research, and that they don't do research on the history of a character, nor do they do any sort of research on any simple things like when I was reading Hex Wives, just basic history, because I'm reading this Hexwives book, and they're sitting there, they have this black witch with these other witches during the 1600s, when this black woman would actually just be a slave working for those witches. So that showed me that they just didn't do any sort of research as related to their story. So when you're going out here and you're writing a story, one of the first things you have to do before you even put your fingers to a keyboard is you have to go out here and do research. Because, for example, when I was doing an ISIS series story called ISIS All About the Goddess, I was doing a story about colleges and then art modeling. So I had to do research on the school that I was basing the story on, the new school here in New York. I had to go check out what their class schedule is. I had to go check out where their buildings are. I had to check out where their locations were. And I had to do that research. And then I had to do research on art modeling and modeling in a college campus. So in order for the story elements to be authentic to the reader and be able to take the reader into that experience, I needed to make that story where the story elements were relatable to the reader. So I had to do research to make the story real to the reader. So that your SJW writer, they're not doing any of that research at all. And when you take a look in their books, you start to see that in some of the stories where they have not done any sort of research on any sort of things. And these details can make or break a story. So when you're going out here writing, one of the things that's important to do is your research, because if you don't do your research right, people are going to call you on it. And this is one of the things many good writers, when I read a SJW comic, they call these guys to the carpet because they look at the details in their story and they find the errors in those details. Now, the other thing that your SJW creators do that winds up messing up all the time is they go out here and they don't really, again, research the history of the universe they're working in. Like, for example, you had Brian Michael Bendis. He made this Iron Man comic and he wanted to bring in Riri Williams. And he brought Riri Williams in just to cover up the fact that he had not done enough research on the Iron Man character. Now, as someone who has read the David Michelini and Bob Layton runs, both of them from the 70s and the 80s, and read the Len Kamenetsky, Kevin Hopgood run, and read the Bill Mantlo run that came before Michelin and Layton, and even some of the Lee Kirby books, I started seeing many of the errors that he made with Tony Stark's history, and I saw mistakes he was making even with the armor. Now, he came up with this whole shape-changing concept, and again, that was a mask to cover up his inability to do research on Iron Man's armor and how it worked, or even basic research on things as related to robotics and physics, and it all showed in their work. And that's another key thing with the SJW comic is you clearly can see that they just don't do their work and it's not on the page. So when I look at their books, again, I don't see the research. I don't see any sort of understanding of the story paradigm as related to comics. And I don't see any understanding as related to just basic story structure and form. Now, the other thing that I see that's a big problem with your SJW comic is that a lot of times these writers, they don't even know how to write basic dialogue. And this is where people start really going into the so-called SJW cringe as related to many of these comics, because you can just read the dialogue and it's just all clunky and forced. And that's something that a first-year writer really has a big problem with. Because I remember when I was writing the first John Haynes story, I used to write these big blocks of dialogue, and I used to think, oh, people talk like that. And then as I started evolving as a writer, I started to realize no one's going to read entire blocks of dialogue, or what I used to call for prose, these bricks of exposition. And this is the other big problem with SJW book, again, is they also want to sit there and think that you're going to sit there and look at an entire issue of exposition. Now, that's another big problem with SJW books, is they think that you're going to sit there, like with the Naomi book, you're going to sit there and buy the first issue and you're going to read 32 pages just to find out that nothing happens. And people, they're not going to invest their money into a comic where they spend $4.99 on a comic where nothing happens for the first issue, nothing happens in the second issue, because it's showing them that there's no reason for them to care. As I stated in my Writing for Strong Heroines live stream, when it comes down to the customer, they want something for their money. And when it comes down to the SJW comic, it doesn't really give you something for your money. So people will spend $4.99 maybe on the first issue, or they may even glance at it in the comic shop. But if they don't see any sort of something happening by the third page, in most cases, they're going to put that comic back on the rack. And if they've spent money on that comic, they are just not going to buy the second issue. But the SJW, because they do not understand the business of publishing, they don't understand how they are alienating their customers, and they don't understand that if you have a book filled with exposition, which is just you explaining things, then you are turning people off. And the reason why SJWs turn people off in their comics is primarily due to the fact that they write from a very passive perspective. And when you write from a passive perspective, you are not going to engage the reader. Now, this is something I learned back about 10 years ago when I first started, again, writing the first John Haynes book that I ever did, The Changing Soul, which I never published. And the first ISIS was that passive writing, it just makes people not want to engage the story. So you really want the reader to be engaged from the first page, and you need to have a very active writing style. So an active writing style, that's going to engage the reader. And active writing, that's going to draw you in from that first page, and it's going to get you turning pages. And that's what you want with a comic book. You want people to keep turning pages until they get to the final page. And once they get to the final page, what they're going to do is anticipate the next book. And that anticipation is what you want from your readers. That's what you desperately want from your readers, because that means you're going to go out here and get more sales. Hi, Happy Life. She says she comes from my old neighborhood, 169th Street and Washington Avenue, where I used to live around there back in the day. I don't live there anymore. I haven't lived there in 30 years, but that's where I lived when I was a kid. So, but we're talking about SJW comics and the elements of SJW comics. And the passive writing is a major element of an SJW comic, because the passive writing combined with that expository writing style, that makes a comic feel very dense, and it doesn't really, again, compel you. Now, you compound this with the absolutely horrible dialogue, and you start to have problems. Because again, I go back to many SJW comics, and I just see these blocks of dialogue, and you don't want blocks of dialogue, because a block of dialogue actually shows you that this person is a first-year writer. And first-year writers, that's one of the things they do, because they believe they have to explain everything. Instead of understanding, you don't have to tell the reader. All you have to do is show them, and showing is very different than telling. When you show the action, you're letting the characters drive the story. And when the characters are driving the story, then you have the stories going to move, and it's going to be active. But what happens is with these SJWs, they're very insecure. So they want to drive the story themselves, and they don't want to let the characters take charge of the story, because a seasoned writer like myself, we understand that we have to let the characters take control of the story and not try to dictate to them. And this is something I saw when I was watching Incredibles 2 and Solo, a Star Wars story. I saw where they had all these elements in the story, but they always wound up getting slowed down because the writers kept coming in and they wanted to push their politics, and they wanted to push their agenda, and they didn't want to come in and just let these characters be themselves. Now, when I'm doing books, whether it be ISIS series books, E-Steam series books, John Haynes books, or Spinsterella books, there comes a point where I have to let go of the characters and let them tell their story. And that's something a writer does, because eventually you start hearing the character's voice in your head, and they are controlling the narrative and they are telling their story. But when it comes down to these SJW writers, they're too insecure because they're very young and inexperienced. So they want to try to control the character. And when you do that, you are going to destroy your story before it even starts. Yeah, Devin, that's Taskmaster in the background. That's another one of the gifts I got from my family members. That's the new Marvel Legends Taskmaster. Jackalope asked me, what do I think about the Blade movies? Those are some of my favorite movies. Blade 1 and Blade 2. I want to go see Blade 2, but I've heard good things about it. But I love the Blade trilogy overall. So rock solid movies, and very well done. Dark Void says he didn't like the New 52, but there's nothing there to be really excited about either company, because again, they have people who don't know how to tell good stories. And that's one of the things that messes up, your SJW comics, is they just don't know anything about storytelling, and they don't know how to let go and let the characters tell things, because they are so obsessed with pushing their politics that what happens is they wind up destroying any sort of momentum the story could have, because they sit there and what they'll do is they have to make sure that the characters are saying what they want them to say instead of letting the characters speak for themselves. And that's another element of an SJW comic, is that they're always about agendas, they're always about pushing narratives, and they're always about pushing these ideas and not about just letting a story do its job. Now, what they again don't understand is that social commentary is done very differently, because Jackalope Slims wants to find out a way to get me in. You can get my email, which is sjsdirectamerica@gmail.com. That's how you can find me. Let me see. It's not letting me type anything in, but you can get to me that way. It's sjsdirectamerica@gmail.com. I may at the end of the stream, I may put my email address down there. So that's, if you want to illustrate a cover for me, that's how you get in touch with me. But when it comes down to your SJWs, they don't really understand, again, things as related to the writing business. Supremo asked me, when did the SJW era start? I believe the SJW era started way back in 2006 with the DC comics, when they started pushing their diversity heroes. I think it started with your Black Firestorm, your Asian Atom, and I believe it started with those characters. A lot of people will say it's the Marvel era, but no, SJW, I believe, started with DC, because your Dan Dido, he wanted to get rid of these characters like Blue Beetle, Atom, Firestorm, and he wanted to replace them with diversity characters like Jamie Reyes, I forget his name, the other guy, Jason Rush, that's who it was, and the Asian Atom, which is Ryan Choi. And when it came down to Ryan Choi becoming popular, what happened was they wound up killing Ryan Choi, and that's something that showed me the racism again as it relates to these SJWs and the identity politics they had. They don't mind having minority characters, but they just can't get more popular than the white characters, because once we had Ryan Choi starting to get over, then they started to have a problem with Ryan Choi and they wound up murdering Ryan Choi. So that shows me again the racism there. And that's what I saw the start of the SJW era. And then it just came over to Marvel Comics. And then we started to see I'd say about 2012, 2013, we started to see SJW Marvel take place. And that's when we started to see a real serious decline in comic sales. And again, that decline started because they started bringing in a lot of grossly unqualified talent, because a lot of these people, they were brought in not because they were skilled and seasoned writers or skilled and seasoned artists. They were brought in because they, again, agreed with the politics of the editors at Marvel Comics, people like Joe Quesada, people like Axel Alonso, and people like Sana Amanat. They believed, they agreed with them, so they were hired basically because they agreed with their political views, and they wanted to push. Yeah, that's right, Jack Little Slim. That's the correct email. So they wanted to push their political views, and they wanted to push their political platform on in these comics. Again, not understanding that social commentary in comics is made between the lines. Now, as somebody who has studied the works of great people who have made social commentary, like the late Gene Roddenberry, like the late Rod Serling, I understood that you could, and Alfred Hitchcock, you could use genres like fantasy and horror to make your political commentary, because Gene Roddenberry did that on the classic 1950s Western, Have Gun Will Travel, and Rod Serling did it on The Twilight Zone, and Alfred Hitchcock did it in Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and Gene Roddenberry, again, did it on Star Trek. They often made commentary on civilizations, they often made commentary on cultures, and they often made commentary on cultures of today in between the lines of their stories. And because they made those commentaries between the lines, people learned from their stories. And it's also, we also saw it, like Rapper 1000 made this point about the X-Men, that X-Men, Spider-Man, and Static Shock, yeah, they also made commentary on serious issues, but they oftentimes did it between the lines. They didn't come out here and preach at people, because that's another thing that SJWs, they used to love to do, is they want to preach at you, they want to shout at you, and oftentimes that makes a lot of their comics, like your Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, come across like ABC after school specials. Now, I grew up in the 80s, and we used to laugh at those ABC after school specials because they were just so cheesy and just so poorly done. And the reason why they were so poorly done is because they were so heavy-handed and so slanted. So they would have an issue on the air talking about drugs or alcohol, and it would just be so over the top. It would just be ridiculous. I remember looking at a TV Guide ad for one in the 80s where they were sitting there talking about the punk scene, and it was so ridiculously done. It showed that, again, the writer just didn't do their research. Yes, bro, they have not aged very well. When you think of an ABC after school special, it's just completely ridiculous, because they are pure propaganda. And if you compare an ABC after school special, you'll see a lot of the same elements of an SJW comic. You'll see a lot of the heavy-handed storytelling, no story model, no research, very, very cringeworthy dialogue. And yeah, I remember Dark Void, the CBS school break ones, those are even worse than the ABC after school specials. And yeah, Rapper 1000, those Lifetime movies, I remember those too. And again, those things, those forms of media come across as pure propaganda, and they literally, they would preach to you and shout at you to the point where you either got really annoyed and turned the TV off, or you did what I did and you just laughed at them because they were just ridiculous. Now, other examples of that type of media that SJWs like to promote are old episodes from the 1980s of shows like Different Strokes, because they had these episodes which were the very special episodes, like Dudley's father smoking, or Arnold and Kimberly taking a ride from a stranger. And these episodes, they were supposed to be, you know, these powerful messages, but they, as a kid, even at 7, 8 years old, to me, they just came across as pure cheese, because it was just, again, so heavy-handed. And the one that was even the most hilarious, unintentionally, was the one where your Dudley was out here and they were with the Gordon Jump character. And that was it was just a cringe fest. It was supposed to be about so-called child porn, but it was just so cringeworthy that it wasn't funny. And if you go look for that Different Strokes episode, it was a two-parter. I remember watching it as a kid and just going, what is this? Because it was that bad. Yeah, Bicycle Man. That was just so, it was so bad. And this trend continued in television. It was on shows like Blossom. It was on shows like Facts of Life. They would do these heavy-handed episodes trying to talk about these serious issues, and they would just be so bad because they were just so preachy, and it was just over the top. And they used to call them, in Jump the Shark, they called them a very special episodes. And these very special episodes, they were so awful, it wasn't even funny. And I can remember the cringe dialogue, because they would sit there and talk about statistics. I mean, you had people going in there talking about statistics, talking about such and such percent. It's like you sit there and you go, who talks like this? And it just makes you look at it and go, it was just so awful that it wasn't funny. And those episodes were just, whenever I think about an SJW comic, this is just what that was. I mean, thank God, like Supremo says, they were phased out in the 1990s, because these episodes were just, if you look at them and you go on YouTube right now, you will see what the precursor to the SJW comic was. It was those old Different Strokes episodes. It was many of those very special episodes. It was these ABC after school specials. These were the predecessor to your SJW comic. And again, they were all about promoting an agenda and pushing an agenda and pushing an idea in people's minds. And usually, again, this is the reason why people started to tune out of these shows, because of those special episodes, because those special episodes, they were so far out there, they were completely ridiculous. And when you read a SJW comic, it's so far out there, it just makes you shake your head. I've read several of them, and I just sit there and go, where do they get these people, and where do they get these ideas? Because they make no logical sense. Now, when it comes down to the SJW comic, they often talk about the whole concept of diversity, but we can clearly see the racism in their so-called diversity narrative, because their so-called diversity narrative, it's always got a white female in charge. Now, the SJW says, oh, we don't have a white male in the comic because the so-called cis white male is the problem. So we need to get rid of the so-called cis white male. But then they replace the white male with a white female, like in the example of your Captain Marvel, or many of the other books I've had to read, like that horrific Goddess Mode, or the one I just took a look at, The High Level from Vertigo. I noticed that, oh, you took out the white male character, and then you replaced them with this white female. And this white female is supposed to show us how strong she is. And the Manifest asked me, what's my thoughts on Spider-Man Homecoming and how they did black men? I did a whole video on that when Homecoming came out, because I was really mad at Spider-Man Homecoming, because they emasculated the black male, they asexualized him, and that whole movie it's just an insult to me. I didn't see any Spider-Man in that movie. And one of the things that, again, turned me off was seeing that black character, the African character, yes, he was smart, but he was just so neutered. He had no voice and no personality. And even the so-called Flash Thompson, who was an Indian, that just made no sense to me because he was such a beta. I mean, he's supposed to be a bully, but I didn't feel any sort of energy coming from him as he would be a threat to him. I just saw that he was like another beta male. He did Spider-Man Homecoming is another. That's what I call the first SJW movie in the MCU, and another example of, again, the SJW and when they come into a platform. So when I look at these SJWs, again, they like to come in and they want to put this white female heroine in the story to replace the white male character, like, again, Captain Marvel and like your Kate Bishop. And usually it's the white females leading everything, and they're replacing the white males. And then after them, they bring in other minorities like your Kamala Khan and your America Chavez. And then again, all the way at the bottom, we have your Riri Williams. So you have another pecking order, but this pecking order is a gynocentric pecking order. And it's done, again, to replace the so-called males of the so-called patriarchy. And they often, again, do a terrible job. And one of the reasons why these SJW characters do a terrible job is because a lot of times these inexperienced writers, what they do is they turn their characters into Mary Sues. And what is a Mary Sue? A Mary Sue is a character that is an avatar for the writer of the story or the people who represent the company. For example, with Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel is just Sana Amanat in the Marvel universe. She's basically an avatar for Sana Amanat. And your She-Hulk, who used to be her own fun, vivacious character, she is now an avatar for Alana Smith, one of the editors at Marvel Comics. So instead of the characters becoming their own people and getting their own voice and telling their own stories, instead, they become avatars for the creator. And as avatars of the creator, they start telling the story that the creator wants. Again, this is about them having an emotional attachment to a character and them having this emotional connection to the character that is too close. And this is something a writer has to understand about writing characters is you can't bring your emotions into these characters, because when you do that, the character becomes a Mary Sue. And I've seen writers do this many times. They will get emotionally attached to a character, emotionally connected to a character, and they will ignore key characters in their story, and it will wind up destroying their plot. So one of the things a writer has to do is they have to detach themselves from the story, and that's how you get a very rich and multidimensional story, and that's how readers get a far richer experience in the story. Because whenever you have a writer who is too emotionally attached, you can see it on the page. When I would read many SJW books, I could see these characters being too emotional, the writer being too emotionally attached. And that's where the editor comes in and pulls you to the side and says to you, hey, you're too emotionally attached to this character, and it's destroying the whole flow of the story because you were too in your feelings about this character, and we're not really getting to see the whole story, and we're not getting to see the character transformation arc because you don't want anything to happen to the character. And this is something a dude's thoughts were telling me about Kamala Khan in the chat, that is boring. And the reason why the book is boring is because your G. Willow Wilson and Sana Amanat don't want anything to happen to Kamala Khan because Kamala Khan is an avatar of your Sana Amanat. Now, I've based the character on myself. I based John Haynes on myself, and I understand that I have to be objective. So I let John Haynes go through things. I mean, I remember a scene in Temptation of John Haynes where John Haynes is racially profiled, and I had to let that character go through that because I wanted to move the story forward, and I wanted people to understand what it meant to be a black CEO. So yes, that's something that's painful, but I let the character go through that because it was all part of his story and it was all part of his character transformation arc. Because as a CEO of Morris Phillips, he was still a black man. And that was the point I wanted to make in Temptation of John Haynes, that he was still going to be a black man, even though he was a CEO, and that this racial profiling just showed that he was going to be black first and a CEO second. But your son Amina, she wouldn't want her character to go through that sort of thing, nor would she want to put her character through challenges like I would put John Haynes through, like going against the Bride of Dracula, which when Dracula turned Isis into the Bride of Dracula, or to go out here and wind up getting into a fight with a god Cassius in Man Who Rules the World, where he literally gets an office tower dropped on him. So when I do characters, I understand that I have to pull myself away from the story and let the characters be the character. But your SJW, they're not going to do that because they're emotionally attached. And that's why their stories really lack, because you have this Mary Sue who is in the story and she's just there to be a part of the Marvel Universe, but then the character never wants to go through any sort of conflict, and they don't ever want to go through any sort of challenge. And that doesn't really make for very compelling reading, because just having Kamala Khan going out here and going to hang out with her friends, that's not something I want to see. Because if I want to see a high school kid hanging out with their friends, I'll pick up an Archie comic, because in an old school Archie comic, at least I get a conflict in that comic, and that conflict allows the story to move forward. So when I look at that SJW comic, it doesn't give me that incentive to go out here and pay for it, because if nothing's going to happen, then you're wasting my money and you're wasting my time. So that's something that the SJW creators don't understand, because they're so caught up in their politics that they don't understand that people want to invest money into comics and they want to invest their time. The time is the most precious thing of all, because when you have a reader, it takes time to read a book. And if you take people's time, then you have to give them something for their time, because that intangible of time is something they just can't get back. So you have to give them something of value for their time. So when I look at the SJW comic, I think to myself, I look at this book, it's $5, and then you're giving me exposition, you're giving me weak dialogue, you're giving me flat characters that are Mary Sue's, and you're giving me absolutely no reason to go out here and either buy the book that's in my hands, or to search for the back issues of these books, or even to go anticipate the next book. So that's another key element of the SJW book, is that it just doesn't give you that a reason to go out here and pick it up. And that passive storytelling, you can easily see it on the page, because with the passive storytelling, I would look at the comic and you get this establishing shot, and it's of a city or of a store, and you don't start a comic off with a picture of something else out here. I mean, that's just too passive. I mean, giving me an establishing shot of some buildings, that's not going to draw me in, because when you have a comic book, the first page of the book should be a splash page. And on that splash page, we need to have the main character, and they need to be active. I mean, when I think of a splash page, I want to answer 3 questions in a splash page. And those questions are, what I got from screenwriting, is who is the main character, what do they want, and why should we care? So you need to answer those 3 questions on the first page. You need to let me answer those 3 questions. Main character, what do they want, and why should we care? And when I was doing the script for Isis All That Glitters, the first 3 questions I put on the page, when I did the splash page, I had Isis teleporting out of a portal onto the street of the city, and she's going to the bank. So the phone rings. So we know that the main character is Isis. We know what she wants to do is go to the bank, and we're going to care because that's going to set up the conflict as later in the story. So in the first page, we know that she's going somewhere. So whenever I would look at a splash page, that's going to give the reader a reason to turn more pages. So that's one of the reasons why I want to do the ISIS graphic novel Indiegogo that's coming on March 5th. And that's one of the reasons why I want to see this project get funded, because I want to show people my skills as a comic book writer, and I want to show them a model of how comic storytelling works from a writer's perspective when you understand the concept of structure and form. So that's a big problem that I saw with many SJW comics. I'm looking at the first page and it's very passive. You've got this establishing shot, then you've got another establishing shot, but it doesn't transition to anything. And then all of a sudden, maybe on the second or third page, here come the characters, and the characters aren't doing anything that makes you really look at it and go, hey, do I want to buy this? Because there's no action going on. Two people sitting there talking in a restaurant, that doesn't really give me a reason to go out here and buy the comic. I want to see some sort of action go on, some sort of conflict, something that is going to pull me in as a reader. That's what I would want from a comic. But the SJW writers, they don't give you a conflict. They don't give you something that makes you say, hey, man, I want to go and see what's going on page 2, page 3, and page 4, because the first 2-3 pages of a comic, they have to really pop. They have to really grab the reader, because that's how you get people to continue reading the book. So when I was writing the All That Glitters script, I had to condense a 50-page prose story into a 51-page comic. And it was a major challenge, but I understood that comics being a visual medium, I have to tell the story with pictures, and the pictures have to move. So they have to move from panel to panel, and they have to give that reader an incentive to go out here and continue reading the book. So that's something that's very important, but we don't see it in SJW comics, because they would rather have you sitting there listening to two people talking about food. Like when I was looking at Unstoppable Wasp #1, they start the book out with your Nadia Pym inside of a restaurant, and they're talking about things instead of giving us a splash page of Nadia Pym flying through the city and then headed towards the immigration office. That would have been far more compelling. And then we see as she's going to the immigration office, she runs into the bad guys. That's the way I would have written it. But your Jeremy Whitley, he gives us this very passive sequence. It takes 5-6 pages, and it kills the book right in the first issue. So many of these SJW books, they don't really understand how to go out here and really set that comic up, because they take it for granted. They thinking it's all about politics, but what they don't understand in the business of writing, you have to make a first impression on the reader. And it's very important to make a powerful first impression on the reader, because this may be your only shot at selling that book. So whenever a writer writes a story, they have to understand that you are selling to the reader, and you have to sell it really immediately, or else you're not going to keep having readers. But many of these SJWs, they're here because they want to push political agendas, not understanding that publishing is a business, and it's one of the roughest businesses out there. And usually 90% of all books fail, and it's only the 10% that do well that cover the losses of the 90. But when you have a company like Marvel, which is filled with SJWs, that 90% of books that fail turn into 99% of books that fail. And usually that 99% winds up with the company taking major losses. The same thing's happening at DC right now, and it's happening right now. I'm going to read some of the comments. Dude's Thought says Jughead was a straight pimp. Yeah, Jughead to me was the original MGTOW. He was one of the original MGTOWs out there, and he was spouting red pill knowledge, especially in the old Sam Schwartz Archie books. You would see him dropping red pill knowledge, and you would see him checking women. So he was he was a straight pimp, and that was one of the things I liked about seeing him. And Lion 2012 says that he likes my videos and works from Toronto. And he's looking to add some of my books to his collection. I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to what he has to say. Yeah, it is bad how they treated Static, and Static is a great character. Devon asks, is that Hercules? Yeah, that is a Hercules in the background. That's the entire, that's all that's Marvel Legends back there, and that's my Marvel display. I'm still trying to sort things out. I've got the DC display on this built up, DC Heroes, and I'm getting ready to do DC Villains in about a couple days. And soon I'm going to do a whole tour of all my figures in my toy collection. Goth's got a chance to see my Voltron collection, but I'm going to do that tour soon. JOS says that the main issue is how they have great characters and how they keep making new characters and only to forget them a year or so. That's a big problem with comics today. They don't really develop anything because the minute they start getting some momentum, they just wind up rebooting everything. And it's a big problem with these SJW comics. And it's a big problem with the comic book industry overall, is that the minute they start creating a character and the character starts to get some heat, what they do is they wind up ending the universe and it cuts their momentum. And this is another big problem with the comic book industry, is that they don't really understand that in order for a book to sell, you have to have momentum. And just when a book like, say, Super Sons, for example, starts to get some momentum. Now, Super Sons was not an SJW book, but it was part of a great momentum that Peter Tomasi and Dan Jurgens wound up building for DC Comics. They wound up getting that book, as I see it, back on track. It was on its way. It could have gone up to 75, 80, 100,000 sales if they stayed on track with that run. But then you had your Dan Dido come in and want to give Brian Michael Bendis the reins, and it just killed that book's momentum. So here are two new characters who were starting to generate some heat. You had Damian Wayne finally coming out of the Mary Sue that he was when he originally came out. And then you had Jonathan Kent starting to generate heat. And what happened was the books wound up having all their momentum knocked out, all due to your Dan Dido coming in and wanting to push a celebrity writer like Brian Michael Bendis, a decision that I found to be really mind-boggling, because your Brian Michael Bendis just came off one of the worst runs of Iron Man in the history of the character. I'm going to take a minute to answer a question from Bombard Dobbit. My thoughts on Amazon dropping its HQ plans from New York City. I feel really bad for New York City, because that was a chance for us to have a really solid revenue stream in terms of taxes. And we've been having budget deficit problems, and that Amazon deal would have really helped increase the tax base. And sadly, your Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez decided to come in here with her social justice agenda, and she derailed the opportunity for many New Yorkers like myself who've been out of work to find jobs and contribute by paying taxes, all because she wanted to push her political agenda. Sup, Street Law Colonel. Shiango the Dragon Slayer asked me, are comic book industry decisions based on ego or insanity? So I believe that they are primarily based on both, because when it comes down to your Dan Dido, I believe it's primarily his ego as related to the New 52. And I believe that your son Amina is also very ego-based, because it's all about her and her narcissism. And that ego is what's driving a lot of the insanity, because many of these people believe that if they keep doing the exact same thing, it's going to lead to a different result. Now, the rest of us in the publishing world, the trade publishing world, we understand that the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. But your SJW creators and SJW publishers and SJW editors, they think that if they continue to do the exact same thing, eventually people will break down and people will change their view and accept what is given to them, because that's what they believe. Dan Dido believed with the New 52. he thought if he continued to push the New 52, that people would eventually accept his version of the DC universe. And unfortunately, what happened in that case is people rejected his DC universe, and it led to a drop in comic sales, and it's leading to the eventual implosion of DC, which has suffered in terms of merchandising and licensing because nobody wants to buy DC products anymore. And over at Marvel, we have Sana Amanat and not Axel Alonso, Joe Quesada continuing to push the exact same characters, and then not just understanding that the audience just isn't interested. Now, an objective trade publisher who is focused on profits, usually what they're going to do if a book doesn't sell, they're going to stop pushing that book. They're going to put a period at the end of it and move on. If they have issues that are in the queue that have already been produced, they're going to say, okay, this book is not meeting the unit sales. And what they're going to do is tell the writer that they're going to pull the plug on the book, and they're going to tell them to draft up a final issue to close it out in an organic fashion. And then they're going to close it up and move on, because they understand that every dollar they spend on a book that doesn't sell is a dollar they're going to lose out of that 10% of books that they could actually spend money on, and that they could actually take their resources and spend that money on something that can actually bring a profit into the publisher. Now, that's the way it's done in trade publishing. Usually when they bring in an author, usually they sometimes give him a 3 or 4 book deal. And if they're not selling books by the 3rd or 4th book, they usually just drop that author. If they don't see the numbers come up, they just write it off as terms of that writer and move on to another writer or another concept. Shiongo is saying, it seems like today, a lot of companies enforce their products onto the customer as though they, the company, are a parent disciplining a child. Richard C. Meyer talked about that himself in one of his videos, about that's how a lot of people at Marvel are. They believe that they can just ram this product down your throat and that they are entitled to your money. What they don't understand is it is the job of the publisher to earn the customer's money. Now, I have had to deal with this myself. I remember when I first started producing ISIS series books, a lot of my readers, they were complaining about the covers, and I didn't have the money to do anything about it at the time, but I didn't really get too indignant about it until I realized that it was hurting my marketplace. I said I just didn't have the money, and I tried to do a Kickstarter and it failed. But then after that, I just went to eBay and I started selling off parts of my toy collection to go out here and get the money to pay Bill Walko to design the Wrath of the Cyber Goddess cover. And I was trying to desperately make efforts to improve the quality of my product instead of trying to shove my view on the throats that they needed my hand-drawn covers. I realized that I had a limitation, and I needed to go out here and fix the problem and listen to my customers. And since then, I have managed to start building momentum, because what I would do is, again, just take the donations from many of the people who read my blog and many of the people who would go out here and support my work, and I would pay artists to design my covers. And that left a strong first impression on those readers, because that's what you need to do. If your customers are telling you that the product, there's something wrong with the product, then you need to listen to those customers. And I would also listen to them when they would talk about things as related to grammar issues and spelling issues. Now, I was just a one-man guy working out of a bedroom, but I always would listen to my customers, and that would make me more diligent as I would go and do the editing on many of my novels. So I would sit there and I would say, I want to give my readers the very best in terms of product. I want to give them the best in terms of quality. And I really want to make sure that they get a book that is on the same level as one from the trade publishers they would buy at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. So what I would do is I would start reading things like the Bedford English Handbook. I would read the Strunk and White's Elements of Style. I would sit there and just read these books hard, and then I would go back at my work and I would just go through it with a fine-tooth comb, because what most people don't know is that before I even release one of my SJS Direct books, like John Haynes' A Conversation with Death, this little 23-page book, usually I have gone over this book about 6, maybe 7 months just with editing and proofreading. And that's just me working out of a bedroom. And what's really sad to me is that with the SJW creators, they are not going to be as conscientious or diligent. And you have editors working there who are on Marvel or DC's payroll. And these people are not as diligent and conscientious as a guy like me who's making a 23-page book with a print-on-demand publisher. Or I'll go out here and make an ISA series book that's about 100 and some pages. And I will try to be more diligent and conscientious than somebody who works at Marvel or DC, a billion-dollar company. These people, SJWs, they have lowered the standard in terms of quality so low that is actually lower than many print-on-demand publishers and self-publishers like myself, who will go out of their way to push harder and continue to try to improve their quality, because we care more about our readers than the SJW creators do. Rapper 1000 asked me, what are my thoughts about Rotten Tomatoes wanting to remove the C ranking for Captain Marvel? And they're doing that because, again, that's part of the whole SJW mantra, which is gynocentrism. And what we have here is a group of white knights and feminists looking to defend the honor of Brie Larson, who went out here and made statements saying that, oh, I don't want white men coming to my press conferences. I don't want white men to promote my movie. And what she doesn't understand is she created a backlash against her own movie. And what these beta males and these feminists are doing is they're trying to censor people who are responding to the statements of your Brie Larson, who went out here and put a middle finger up at all of those comic fans out here who have been supporting the MCU since day one. I mean, when I think of the MCU was primarily built by men. It was built by men who went out here and did things like I did right now. Like, I get all these figures as gifts, and some of them I buy myself. It was guys like me who have these collections. They were the ones primarily going to go see these movies. They were the ones going out here to support these movies. They were the ones going out here to build billion-dollar franchises. And you have your Brie Larson putting a middle finger up at all of those people like myself and telling us that we're worthless, we have no value, and that she feels entitled to this audience out there of so-called women who are going to come out and go see this movie. And I hate to break it to Brie Larson, but again, the MCU back in 2008 was built by people like myself and my family member who went all the way down to the Concourse Multiplex and went to see Iron Man in the first week. It was people like us. This was back when I was working at City College. I mean, that was a big thing for me. I was looking forward to that movie. And that's what made the MCU what it is. And what they're doing right now is just going out here and giving her a pass. And that's all part of gynocentrism. Now, some people say that, we need to go see Alita Battle Angel. And yeah, if you want to do that, you can do that. But on March 5th, before this movie is released, I am going to be launching the ISIS graphic novel Indiegogo. And if you really want to really stick it to Captain Marvel, you can donate to the ISIS graphic novel Indiegogo. And I'm hoping to have that comic ready by the end of the year. Bill Walko is going to be doing the art. He did the art for Escape from Transylvania, and he did the art for Bride of Dracula's cover, and he did the cover for All That Glitters. And this comic is going to be a great comic. So if you really want to put some money into something, you can put it into the ISIS graphic novel Indiegogo. So that's something I hope everybody comes out to. But she's sitting there and she puts a middle finger up at all of those comic fans who were supporting this universe. And they're angry because they invested in this universe, and it's all going to get derailed because of this Mary Sue character who just pops up out of nowhere, never really did anything. And Supremo was right. Outside of the Ms. Marvel story where Rogue took her powers in Avengers Annual 10, most people didn't care about Ms. Marvel. And I read the entire Ms. Marvel run, and it was bland. It was very boring, and it didn't really grab you. And even with Chris Claremont, the writer of the X-Men at the time, doing his very best, he changed her costume to the iconic swimsuit costume. And Chris Claremont did everything he could to help this character, and he could not get this character over. And it wasn't until Rogue got her powers that the character started to have some sort of something compelling, because what made Rogue compelling was the fact that she couldn't touch anyone. And when it comes down to women, touch is very important. Touch is something that women do because women are emotional, and this is how women connect with people. They go out here and touch them, and Rogue cannot really connect with anyone, and that's a major core part of her character that makes her very compelling to the reader. So that was a big problem with the Ms. Marvel, and her story really, it just doesn't really come into any sort of fruit. So when I look at your Captain Marvel, I looked at the movie's trailers. It's just a bland, generic movie, just like Solo was a movie. But you have your Brie Larson sitting there talking about this is the event of the century and that this is the first movie to feature a woman. And I'm sorry, but we had Elektra, we had Halle Berry's Catwoman. I mean, they flopped, but we also had Wonder Woman just a couple of years ago. And Wonder Woman, for the first 3/4 of the movie, is a superior film. It's on low level, as I say, Superman 78, because of Gal Gadot's performance, and her performance elevates that really weak script up to a higher level. If it wasn't for her and Patty Jenkins, it wouldn't have been the great a movie as it was, because it was because of Patty Jenkins' vision and Gal Gadot's charisma that really took that movie over. And it was really Gal Gadot going out there and just really sharing with the fans that really got people into the movie, because Gal Gadot was literally like a hero to many people. She was just that kind and that nice to people. And even if you look at her Instagram, she's just downright friendly and approachable. And she made that character really compelling to everyone. So when I look at Gal Gadot, she elevated Wonder Woman. And that was one of the reasons why the character really got over with people, in spite of Zack Snyder and all the things that he did to mess up the DC cinematic universe. Patty Jenkins and Gal Gadot should really be given a lot of praise, because they took it to the next level as related to Wonder Woman, and they made the character very relatable to audiences of casual readers and comic fans. Shiango the Dragon Slayer asks, there was also an area of female action movies. Yeah, the Charlies, I remember those. Resident Evil, that was very good. And Underworld, those had strong heroines too. And Mila Jovovich in Resident Evil, she practically carried that franchise. Same thing with Kate Beckinsale. They both carried those franchises, and they don't get the credit that they're given because they took those B, what we considered B movies. Same thing with Tomb Raider, Angelina Jolie, and made really good movies. I'm trying to go down. Yeah, there have been a whole bunch of female adventure movies, but they don't really get the credit that they do. Yeah, Devin, I think that Shazam is going to be fun. I thought Aquaman was going to be rock solid when I saw the trailer, Shiango, and I didn't get a chance to see it, but I'm hoping that it comes to DC Universe. I'm going to try to get a sub because I want to look at Titans, and I want to look at some of the other shows, and I want to do some videos on those other shows. But I'm just trying to get through some of these other movies I want to see on Netflix real quick, because I have a Netflix right now, but I want to get a DC Universe sub sooner rather than later. But when it comes down to Captain Marvel, it's just Brie Larson destroying everything. And then we have these white knights coming out here and these feminists. They want to try to deflect and say that it's not her fault. And it is her fault, because any actor who goes out here and wants to promote their film, they want to put the best face forward on that film. and they want people to come see it. But what she does is she wants to go out here and talk about her film is for women at the expense of men, when it was, again, men who made the MCU what it is. And she wound up losing a lot of people, alienating a lot of people who would have gone out here and spend money to go see this movie. So I have no incentive to go see it. I have no interest in seeing it. And if it were to pop up somewhere like a Lifetime or one of these cable channels, or even ABC, because I have a feeling ABC is going to be forced to air this movie after they lose so much money on it. And that's what's going to happen, is the movie is just going to flop so badly. It's going to be like Force Awakens. They're going to have to run it on TV. So that's the only way I would watch it. But I look at your Captain Marvel, and this is like an SJW adaptation of an SJW comic come to life. Now, another problem with your SJW comic, in addition to the stories not being written well and they're not giving you those passive visuals, they get the worst artists to go out here and draw these comics. It's like when I look at a lot of these comics, like Border Town, Goddess Mode, and your High Level, and even books like Marvel, like your Squirrel Girl and Kamala Khan Ms. Marvel, the art does not really fit any sort of house style. When it comes down to a lot of this art, it's just absolutely terrible, and it doesn't really gel with the characters. It doesn't really fit with the characters, and you really don't really get a sense even of how things are going. I mean, I remember looking at that book, Black AF Devil's Due. Oh, that art was absolutely horrifically bad. And I sat there, I looked at it, it's like, this is some of the worst art that I have ever seen in my life. And the sad part is, he crowdfunded to get this book published, and he didn't really think to invest people's money responsibly. I mean, if I want to go out here and do a comic, I want to go out here and hire a really good quality artist and go out here and make a strong impression on people. You don't want to go out here and make a comic and the art is that bad where you got a guy with a dookie arm that everybody has mocked, or you don't want to see something with a guy like the Kamala Khan Ms. Marvel, where they had this art that looked like something out of a children's book. I mean, I look at Kamala Khan Ms. Marvel, and the art doesn't really gel with the rest of the books in the Marvel Universe. It just doesn't consistent with it. And that's all, again, due to Sana Amanat not understanding house style. Like, she doesn't understand the whole concept of house style. She doesn't understand that every comic character has to have, their books have to be consistent with each other, so that when somebody looks at a Marvel comic, they understand that, you know, everybody's not, every book has the art that all fits the same style. Like if you're doing photoreal, everything is photoreal. And if everything's like a Bruce Timm style, everything is the same. You really want that consistency, because that's going to give readers an incentive to go out here and buy the books. But your Kamala Khan Ms. Marvel, your Squirrel Girl, they're done in this cartoony style or this children's fiction book style, and it just doesn't gel with the rest of the Marvel Universe. And books like America Chavez, they are done in this other style, and you look at it and you go, this doesn't fit with the Avengers, this doesn't fit with Fantastic Four, and the books feel like they're from another universe, but we're told they're part of the same universe. I mean, when I look at something like a Mark Waid and Chris Samnee Daredevil, yes, the art style is very unique, but it always was consistent. That was one of the things I liked about Chris Samnee's art, was how consistent it was with the rest of the Marvel Universe. Yes, it was different, but it was still consistent. But with SJW books, the art isn't that consistent at all. And that's the big problem with a lot of their books. And then in addition to not being consistent, the art isn't very clean. Now, one of the things that a good artist is going to do, they're going to make sure that their art is clean, because you want to be able to convey what the story is told, even if there are no word balloons. Now, when I take something like Bill Walko's art here on Bride of Dracula, this art tells a very powerful story, and it does it very clearly. And that's one of the reasons why I like working with Bill Walko, is because his art always tells a great story, and you don't have to have a single word balloon on that page to understand what's going on. So the picture tells the story, and when you have a comic, you want to have that picture telling that story, because that picture, again, is going to lead to a first impression on the reader, in the reader's eyes. That's what's going to grab the reader, is the image on the cover. And if you don't have a good, strong image, you can't tell a good story in pictures, you're going to wind up losing the reader. And that's what kills a lot of the SJW books at the store, is they wind up alienating the reader because the pictures aren't very strong in a medium that is visual. And that's one of the reasons why, again, like working with Bill Walker, because like on a book like Easting the Sands of Time, you see the story being told right there on the page. And that's something you need if you want to sell comics. And SJW comic pros, they don't understand this. They come out here, and a lot of them think that they're entitled to these jobs, not understanding that you have to earn them. And they also go out here not understanding that the first impression you give to the reader is the only way you're going to generate a sale. So that first impression is important. And if you come out of the gate with terrible art, then you are going to start stumbling. And then when you come into the story and it's terrible, you have lost the reader. And when you lose the reader, that's it. They're not going to buy any books at that point. So you go from somebody flipping through a book to not buying a book. And those who buy a book, like your Richard Meyer and many others, like Yellow Flash, all they're going to do is roast that book up extra crispy before they do something horrific to that book to express their contempt for that SJW comic pro. And you really don't want that type of word of mouth. And this is something the SJW comic pro doesn't understand, is that if you have a bad first impression on the reader, what's going to happen is they're going to spread a word of mouth about you, like Richard Meyer and many others, like Umbrella Guy, Yellow Flash do, and Ethan Van Sciver. What they do is they're going to spread a word of mouth about you, but it's not going to be a good word of mouth about you. And if you have a bad word of mouth about you, what's going to happen is people aren't buying your books because they have no reason to. Because again, books are about investing time. And if people don't see a reason to invest time in your books, they're not going to invest any money in your books. Rapper 1000 asks, what Brie Larson did to get girls to go watch your film. That was a low move, saying that you're going to do this to help girls. That was her trying to play the Black Panther narrative, where they had all these kids going out here to buy these Black Panther tickets, and these people were buying entire schools tickets for Black Panther. And what she wanted to do was try to regenerate a phenomenon. Now, Black Panther was, as I see it, lightning in a bottle. It was a phenomenon almost on the level of Star Wars. And what she did was really low, because it was showed that she was about exploiting people and she was about taking advantage of them. She wants to make it like this is some powerful event where everybody has to go see this movie. Well, I hate to break it to Brie Larson, but you're about 2 years too late, because Wonder Woman, when I went to see Wonder Woman at the matinee at the Magic Johnson, there were kids there. And the fun part was the kids were excited to see Wonder Woman. They were getting into it. And I remember seeing those entire classes coming into that matinee, and they were pumped because the movie was just a fun movie. So I don't really see that about Captain Marvel, because Captain Marvel, she seems to be Ms. Identity Politics. And if they do to this movie what they did to Incredibles 2, it's going to be unwatchable, because I went through watching Incredibles 2 on Netflix. And after watching Incredibles 2 on Netflix, I just got disgusted, because when I watched the original Incredibles, that was an objective movie. It was about action and adventure, and it was just a lot of fun. And all of that fun was sucked out of it because Disney wanted to come in, and instead of giving us a story that picked up where the Incredibles were coming together as a family, we got the family becoming this propaganda piece for feminism, and we got Elastigirl turned into a feminist character, and that sucked all the energy out of that movie. And that's what I see coming to Captain Marvel, because it's all about her being a hero and not her serving the people. And that's a big problem with a lot of SJW books, is that they're all entrenched in narcissism. It's all about the hero, and it's all about what they get from people, and it's not about them serving the people. So when I was writing the first Isis, one of the things a scene I had was Osiris breaking down to Isis what a goddess is. And he tells her, he asks her a critical question: do we serve the people, or do the people serve us? And she doesn't understand that it's the gods who serve the people, and that it's a reciprocal relationship, because she's thinking about things from a human perspective and not the perspective of a god. So when I came up with the character, I wanted to show that it was about the people, and it was about helping the people. And that's where the whole goddess next door concept comes from, is that it's about helping people. But when it comes down to SJW characters, like your Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, like your Captain Marvel, and many others, it's all about what they can get from the people, and not what the people can get from them. Now, I learned about superheroes, again, as far back as when I was 4 years old. And one of the stories that resonated me was with Spider-Man's story. And in that story, you have Peter Parker, who's told by Uncle Ben that great power comes great responsibility. And then after the tragic death of Uncle Ben, Peter Parker understands that he has to use his power responsibly, and he has to go out here and look out to protect those who don't have power. So that's a story that resonated with me and stayed with me for many years. But your SJW comic creators, they don't really understand where superheroes are coming from, in that superheroes serve communities, and they help out in communities, and they want to serve the people because they want the people to have what is best. They want to protect people from those who would look to hurt them. And that's something I talk about in Isis All That Glitters, the paperback version, and was coming up in the Indiegogo. The story is going to be about serving the people and serving the community, because I believe that's something that we have really gotten too far away from in today's comics, because in today's comics, we are no longer really focused on the superheroes serving the communities. It's like everything these days is very insular, and everything is all about the hero looking to get their needs met, and it's not about them looking to serve the community. So it's a big problem, as I see it, as related to storytelling, because when it comes down to many stories, everything is about everybody being in their universe, whether it be in some major event that's going on where all the characters are taking on some menace that goes on for over a year in a multi-crossover event, or we get these stories where where the characters are just taking on these bad guys, and they've become so disconnected from the people that we don't get to see ourselves. And that's a big problem with many of these SJW books, is that we don't get to see how superheroes serve us. And I even saw that in Incredibles 2. It got so insular that it wasn't about how the supers helped others. It was just about them. Now, when I was doing All That Glitters, I really wanted to touch on that, because it was very important to me, showing how Isis serves the people. And even if she's feeling bad, she's going to go out here and serve the people as the goddess next door. And that's a big problem I saw in comics. And that's, again, another reason why I want to do the Indiegogo, is because I want to show people what a superhero is supposed to be about. Because superheroes, they have all of this great power, and they understand they have a responsibility to serve those in the community. But SJW characters, they don't see themselves serving people. They don't see themselves as a part of a community. They don't see themselves as a part of a larger world. They see themselves as their only world, and they see themselves as the only people in the world. And that's a big problem I see with many SJW comics, and it's also a problem I see in many other comics out here. It's just everybody's in their world, but they're not a part of a connected world. And that's a big problem with many SJW books, is that these characters, they just come from themselves. They come from what they want. And that's, in some ways, makes them feel like supervillains, because the supervillain always comes from themselves and what they want. Greetings, Robbie, Robbie's 2349. Great to have you on the stream. I guess he's new to the stream, but that's a big problem with superheroes today, is that they're very selfish, and that's something that I saw with Riri Williams, and that's something that I saw with Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, Captain Marvel, and even some of those Vertigo books. It was just all about them, and it was all about them in their world and not in our world. And that's something I am not happy seeing in SJW books, because it shows that the writers aren't connected to the world. And that's something that I had to break out of over the last decade or so, because as a writer, when you're starting out as a writer, as a first-year writer or second-year writer, it's all about you. But then as you start sharing your work with readers, you start understanding that you're part of a larger world. Robbie's 2349, he says he's a longtime watcher of my videos. Again, I'm glad to see you here. We're talking about SJW comics and the elements of SJW comics. And that selfishness is another element of an SJW comics. It's always I, me. And it's never, about the world around us or the people around us. And that's something that I wanted to touch on in All That Glitters, which is one that's out on Amazon and paperback right now. It'll be available in ebook on Kindle at the end of March. And this is also going to be the story that's going to be adapted for the graphic novel Indiegogo. So this is one you really want to pick up, because I really talk about the everyday superhero, and I talk about what the everyday superhero is supposed to do. Dark Void asks if I'm going to watch Cloak and Dagger. I don't have Hulu, so I can't afford all of these things. If you guys want me to go out here and get Hulu and DC Universe, you have to donate to the Patreon, because that's the only way I can pay the bills to watch these shows. I also have to find the time to watch them. I wouldn't say that SJW heroes are anti-heroes, D. Woodward. I would say that they are, in some ways, villains, because Wolverine is an anti-hero. And what an anti-hero is a character, he doesn't play by the rules, but he still goes out here and participates in heroic acts. For example, Wolverine, he doesn't play by the rules. And Janie Bell, the zombie tramp, now Dan Mendoza says she's a bad guy, but Janie Bell, I would say that she was more of an anti-hero, that she would go out here and she would try to mitigate the damage of her being a zombie, and by mitigating the loss by going after people who were just reprehensible human beings. And she would try to be a hero and mete out some sort of rough justice on perverts and deviants and all sorts of sick people. And that's how she would go out here and try to mitigate the damage from her condition. But that's what an anti-hero does. Like the Incredible Hulk is an anti-hero. He's not a superhero. He's an anti-hero. And he metes out rough justice on anybody who comes his way. And usually what happens is the Hulk just winds up meting out some sort of justice on people out there. So that's an anti-hero. But an SJW hero, they are so caught up in themselves that that's what makes them almost like villains, because everything is about them and what they want, and not about other people and meeting other people's needs. Supremo is right. Punisher is an anti-hero in that he kills, but he tries to, again, mitigate the damage to the innocent people, and he tries not to harm innocent people. So what an anti-hero does is he goes out here, and yes, he's doing bad things, but he only does bad things to bad people. So that's an anti-hero. A SJW hero, they're just a selfish person who believes that they're doing good, but they're not doing anything good for anyone. In most cases, they do more harm to people like I read in the last 3 issues of the new Unstoppable Wasp series, where your Nadia Pym winds up getting beat up by this woman, and then her parts of her girl squad get beat up. And instead of her, dealing with it and navigating through her emotions, she winds up having a breakdown and then is trying to solve the problem instead of understanding that you can't really solve a problem. You lost because you were arrogant and you thought you had it. And that was one of the things I saw in Unstoppable Wasp. And instead of her learning from her mistakes, we see her melting down. And then we get the excuse from the writer, Jeremy Whitley, because he's too emotionally invested in the character, that, oh, she's bipolar. And I saw that as a cop-out as I was reading Unstoppable Wasp. And I said to myself, you want to give this character an out for being arrogant and being unprepared for a real challenge. And then when she loses in a real challenge, you want to have her play the mental illness card and make her into a victim. And that's not what a responsible, objective writer goes out and does. And a responsible, objective writer, what they do is they let that character go through that loss, like what I have in the story Isis All That Glitters. Isis goes through a really bad loss in the story. When Goldenshine beats up Isis, she winds up losing. But instead of having her go through some sort of mental breakdown like they have in Unstoppable Wasp, I show how the character deals with that defeat and navigates through her emotions and starts working towards a solution, because that's what a hero does. A hero understands that, yes, you lost the fight, but then you have a responsibility to other people in the community to prevent them from being harmed by others. And the Isis character understands that she has a responsibility to protect the community from Goldenshine. And that's why she goes out the next day and takes the villain Goldenshine back on after this great defeat that she encounters. And that defeat, again, winds up being broadcast all over social media, which would be an incredibly humiliating thing to deal with. But she winds up dealing with it. But when I look at the Unstoppable Wasp, they show us how this character literally goes berserk to the point where she's attacking her friends and is withdrawing to the point where she goes inside of a lab, inside of her necklace. And instead of her having the coping skills to deal with that loss, what happens is we see this character fall completely apart. And all Jeremy Whitley shows us with that character is that this character is just not fit to be a hero, because a hero, what they will do is like what Isis does in All That Glitters, is have to deal with that loss and understand that she has a responsibility to others, and she doesn't want to go out here and hurt others, because that's not what a hero does. A hero, they come from within and they find that resolve to continue going on in spite of their loss. So that's one of those big problems that I see with many of these SJW books. They just don't understand that a hero's job is, yes, you lost the fight, but you have to persevere. And that's what makes us respect a hero, is the fact that they will go out here, learn from their mistakes, and continue to go on, because that's part of the hero's journey. But the SJW, their idea of a hero is that, oh, I'm just going to fall completely apart. But in the real world, nobody falls completely apart. People, yes, you lose a fight, you fall down, but then what you do is you get back up. And Rapper 1000 says, a person can learn more from their defeats than their victories. And that's a point I make in All That Glitters. The story is that Isis has to learn from her defeat at the hands of Goldenshine, that to overcome and persevere in the face of a loss. And that's something we're not seeing in superhero stories these days, is a hero getting up and taking that loss and then learning from that loss. And that's a lesson that's important, because when you have a hero story, kids learn from that story and adults learn from that story. Hey, you lost. Okay, this is how you cope with the loss, and then you have to learn how to move on. But when I was reading Unstoppable Wasp, you have 2 issues of her just falling completely apart. And then we get this cop-out where they come in with this bipolar excuse. And again, that showed me that Jeremy Whitley was too emotionally attached to the character. And instead of us getting some growth, he gives her an excuse for her out-of-pocket and irresponsible behavior. Because when you have a character who's supposed to be this unstoppable character, again, I would like to see unstoppable grit and determination, not this character crumbling into dust when a little bit of pressure is put on them. Libra Legend, good afternoon. Lightning Fan, hi, how you doing? 2 new guys coming into the live stream where I'm talking about SJW heroes and elements of SJW comic books. And when it comes down to these SJW heroes, they just don't know how to fail. They don't know how to lose. And that's another big part of why SJW books are so terrible, is because the writers oftentimes, again, because they are emotionally attached to the character, they don't really put serious challenges in front of them. And then usually they wind up having easy victories where they oftentimes put them up against jobbers, and those jobbers, like these D and C list villains, wind up beating them very easily. And oftentimes they wind up beating them so easily that we see them take them on in one panel, but then in the next panel, we just see the hero beating the villain. And again, that's because the writers don't want to put their character through any sort of struggle because they're emotionally attached to that character. And that's not a good way to have a comic, because oftentimes readers, when they read comics, they want to see the hero overcome the challenges in their personal life and in their life as a hero. So they want to see that challenge, but the SJW book will oftentimes not give us the challenge. They'll just quickly transition us over to the hero beating the bad guy. And when you do that, you cheat the reader out of their story. The reader comes into the story, they want to see the hero overcoming adversity. They want to see them overcoming the challenge, and they want to see the bad guy beaten by the hero. But instead of giving us that, the SJW writer, they will just fast forward us over. And that's what's really frustrating, because it looks like they're just trying to go out here and give us an easy win. And that's something that I see usually with what they call the one punch or the head trauma. Those are usually the 2 things that they do to go out here and win and beat the character. And yeah, Lightning Fan makes a good point. He doesn't think that if they're emotionally attached and they think of themselves as the hero, but because they want the safe space, they don't want any harm. Now, when it comes down, I know as a professional writer, I know one thing that people do is that they do, when you are emotionally attached, what you do is you start seeing yourself as the hero. And because you want the character to win, what you'll do is you'll do things that'll make it easy for the hero. And that's what I used to do back in my 20s when I started writing. But as I got older, I started to understand that it wasn't about me. It was about my audience. And I couldn't come in here and, fix things for the hero, because then the reader wouldn't learn anything from the experience. So what they do is they are so, as I see it, emotionally involved, because again, this is something that I know from over 20 years of experience as a writer, is they will just sit there and they will bring themselves into it, and they don't want anything to happen to their character. But that prevents us from seeing this character really grow. That really prevents us from seeing this character really learn, and then prevents us from seeing them do some awesome stuff that they could do with their powers. So Tim Scott says he has been subscribed to many of the comic writers giving their input into what the industry is now. I would love to see what some of these comic writers channels, because I think that we really need to hear more of them from them. But as a professional writer myself, I just see a lot of these guys, and they're making a lot of first year and second year mistakes. And these are the mistakes that you make when there's no editor there to really give you any sort of serious guidance or to be really critical of your work. And when you have a good editor, they're going to really take your work apart, and they're going to totally deconstruct that work to the point where they're looking at it, because they're looking at it objectively and they're looking at it from the customer standpoint. And that's what the editor's job is. His job is to really be that representative for the customer and talk to the readers, talk to the writer, and let them know this is what the customer is seeing in the book. This is what they see whenever they read your story. Now, when I look at a book like a Squirrel Girl or a Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, and if I was an editor and I look at those books, I'm like, you're going to have to take this back, because this book really has no conflict. This book has no main character that really wants anything that is of value. This story has no real challenge. This character has no obstacle. And this character really isn't growing in any way, shape, or form that's going to allow the reader to connect with them. I mean, when I look at Kamala Khan, yes, she's a Pakistani Muslim, but there's nothing there that would make me connect with her. Same thing with Captain Marvel, and the same thing even with the old She-Hulk series that your Mariko Tamaki wrote. It was just a bunch of stuff happening, but there was nothing there that would make you say, hey, I want to go see this book, or this book makes me care. Patrick Smith leaves a great point that these SJWs really model their characters after Doctor Doom. And a lot of them, they remind you of a supervillain. They're just so selfish and narcissistic that it's, again, all about them and getting praise from the people, and being emotionally validated. And that's not what a hero is. A hero, oftentimes like Spider-Man, they do things because it's the right thing to do, not because they're going to get this emotional validation or this praise from the public. And oftentimes a hero will have to do things, and again, it's not going to get them a lot of praise. And when I did Isis, I oftentimes focused on the character, and I made it where she didn't really even want the praise. She just wanted to see people done right. So that's something that a hero does. They don't do it for the praise. They don't do it for the accolades. They do it because they feel like they have a responsibility to the community. Robbie's2349 asks, if a writer is emotionally attached, there needs to be balance to create a compelling story. And yeah, you can't protect the protagonist. That's something I learned many years ago, because if you protect them, what they're going to do is it's just going to suck the energy out of the story. And I saw that with Incredibles 2. They were just doing everything to protect Elastigirl, and it just destroyed the book. Yeah. The Power Rangers book, Rapper 1000 was talking about, the Yellow Flash talked about it too. And yeah, that book has been very good. And it really puts the characters through their paces. And that's what a good writer wants to do. They want to really show what's great about that character, because when you show what's great about that character, they show it through what they go through, what challenges they take on, and what obstacles they overcome. So that's something people want to see in a comic, but the SJW comic pros, they don't want to show you that, because one, again, the emotional attachment, and then two, you have these editors like Alana Smith and Heather Antos before her and many others shielding them from any sort of criticism. So I look at the criticism part, and it's a big problem, because a writer has to take criticism. I mean, I've had to take it. I've had to take a lot of heat on different books that I've done. And I've had to even deal with one-star reviews on books like Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, and many other books based on some people's opinion of a story. And you have to take something out of it, out of criticism, in order to improve your work. But a lot of these people, they want to live in a safe space, but writing is not a safe space. Writing is one of the harshest businesses out there, and you have to develop a thick skin if you hope to survive in the writing world, the creative world, and the publishing world, because that's the way the business usually is. But the SJW Comic Pro, they don't know how to take constructive criticism. They don't know how to take it when somebody critiques their work. And then you have people like Sana Amanat. What they want to do is try to censor people and try to bury them. And that's not what a good editor or vice president of a publishing company does, because those writers need that feedback in order to understand if their work is conveying a message to the reader and if they are going out here and the book is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Now, if a book is doing what it's supposed to do, then a writer should get praise. Like I've given praise to Josh Howard for his T-Bird and Throttle. It's just a great comic. I've given praise to Dan Mendoza for Zombie Tramp. I've given praise to Chris Brown for Omega Black. All of those are great, solid comics, but the SJW comics, these guys, they don't know how to take criticism and they don't know how to deal with a constructive critique because of the enabling by editorial. Now, when you put a book out there in the marketplace, like I've put the paperback of All That Glitters out there now, and I've had books like East-Steam, The Sands of Time out for a good 3 or 4 months now, and Bride of Dracula's been out for over 2 years now. You put it out there and you let it go, and then you take the criticism that you get from the readers and the feedback you get from the readers, and you apply that to your next project. Now, when it comes down to a lot of my stories, I get a lot of positive feedback from my readers, but there are also things that they want to see as well that they want to know, that they want me to work on. And I take those into consideration. Now, I remember back when I was doing the Spinsterella trilogy, one of my readers, they came to me on Facebook and they told me that there was a gap between Spellbound and Spinsterella and that I really should write another book to complete the gap. And I was going to leave it at just those 2 books, but then I realized he was right. And that's when I came up with the whole legendary Mad Matilda story, because I understood that he's right. You just cannot leave a gap between those 2 stories. And that was allowed me to create the Spinsterella trilogy, because just that one book was me listening to my readers. And that's something a good writer has to do. They can not only just write stories, putting fingers to the keyboard, they also have to go out here and listen to their readers. If your readers are telling you something, then you have to really listen to them. I was reading Rapper 1000. He said, reality is a hero to us, but a villain to the SJWs. But reality is a hero to me, and that's something that's very important to me. And the SJW, they don't want to live in reality. They want to live in a bubble, because as I said before in a previous live stream, I believe, that the SJW, oh no, it was a video, and it was a video I did, and the SJW, they believe that they are a celebrity, they believe that they are a superstar, and they believe that they have arrived all because they are writing a comic book and they are on social media. Now, this social media piece is a big problem with your SJW, in that they believe that this is them coming into some sort of stardom or some sort of fame, when, as I see it, when you have an SJW, what they don't understand is that the comic book industry is in the worst condition that it's ever been in. You have these SJWs are sitting there thinking they're like rock stars, but they don't understand is, how can you be a rock star when your audience is barely 4,000 people? 4,000 people isn't even half of a housing project here in the Bronx, because there are housing projects that have 4,000 people. And most of these comics, they get about 8,000 orders, like a Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, or a Captain Marvel. At the most, they get about 11, 12, 13,000. And usually when you get those type of orders, you can divide that by 2 and you're going to get your sales, because usually your sales are half of what people order. So many of these books are barely selling 4,000, barely selling 8,000, barely selling 6,000. But you have many of these comic pros, they're acting like they're rock stars, and they just don't have the numbers. Now, as a writer myself, I understand I can't be a rock star even if I sell 100,000 copies or even 1 million copies, because I have a responsibility to my customers to give them the very best product. And when it comes down to the SJW, they're thinking that the comics are supposed to be made for them. And that's where I come up with the analogy regarding how they act a lot like the old independent publishers back in the 1980s who thought their books were great. But when it comes down to your SJW Comic Pro, they're sitting there thinking that, oh, I'm a rock star at 4,000 sales. But again, 4,000 sales, again, isn't even a Morrisania in the Bronx one housing project. One housing project, Butler houses or was there Daniel Webster houses? That's 4,000 people. So they're sitting there thinking that they're sitting there thinking that they're superstars when there are romance novelists who can go out here and pull 4,000 sales on the first week. I mean, this is a brand new romance novelist. And they're going to pull 4,000 sales, but the SJW Comic Pro, they think they're a superstar. And because they think they're a superstar, what they do is they go out here and they start acting really nasty on places like Twitter and Facebook, a place where you desperately need to form a relationship with your customer. Now, as a publisher myself, whenever I go on Twitter and Facebook, I do my best to keep it professional because I know that not only are my followers watching me on Twitter and Facebook, but other people are out here watching me on Twitter and Facebook. And those people are going to see my behavior, and that's going to either give them a reason to buy my books or not buy my books. So I try to keep it very professional. I try to keep it mostly about book promotion over there. I may drop a status here or there once in a while that talks about politics, but then I try to, again, keep it objective and keep it very critical, not try to get too emotional. Now, the big problem with many of these SJWs is they want to go out here and they think that they can go out here and attack the fans. And this is all part of the Dan Dido approach, which is I call the angry reader is an engaged reader. And they think that by making people angry, it's going to stir up all this controversy, which is going to generate sales. And that's not how you generate sales. That's how you turn people off away from your product. Because again, you want to leave that first impression on people when you are a first-time author and nobody knows you. You want to go out here and leave a strong first impression on them so they'll go out here and buy your books. But when they go out here and say things like F you to the fans or go out here and have a nasty exchange with people, that doesn't give the comic fan to not buy the book, the reason not to buy the book, but it also gives the casual reader a reason not to buy the book. So that's one of the reasons why their books really don't gain any traction, because as a rookie author, you are coming out here out the gate brand new, and then you want to sit there and get in people's faces to threaten them, harass them, and intimidate them, and you're then going to ask them to actually spend money on your product. And that's just a slap in the face to your customer. I mean, your customer is sitting there. When you have a customer, you want to give them a reason to buy your product, and you want to start a relationship with that person. And it's hard to start a relationship with a person who is cursing at you and attacking you, and that doesn't give them a reason to go out here and buy these books, because that's what the SJW Comic Pro thinks that they're doing. Oh, I can attack these people. But if you attack people, that makes them defensive. And when people get defensive, they close their wallets. And when people close their wallets, that's going to be the end of your chances of getting a sale. So many SJW Comic Pros, they shoot themselves in the foot right out the gate. A lot of these guys, they don't understand that this is your first job. But if as your first job, you need to make a strong first impression on the reader. You need to go out here and be as professional as possible. You need to get the reader's attention with a great story and a great hook. And you need to put yourself on a page. Now, whenever I'm out here, whether it be with a book like Isis, All That Glitters, or Easting, The Sands of Time, or which was part of Fantasy Flashback Fall, or John Haynes, A Conversation with Death, or the two Isis vampire books, I'm always trying to put myself on a page, and I'm always trying to put a strong first impression on the reader, because I want them to know that I'm a guy who's going to go out here and produce consistent quality books, and I want to leave a strong review of the reader. Thanks, Robbie's 2349. He's talking about a review Sandman did of my Man Crisis book, and I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to go look at it soon, but he says that Sandman was impressed by the book, and it got a great review. Man Crisis is a nonfiction book I did last year in fall, and this is the nonfiction book I did, The Man Crisis. It talks about all the issues that men are going through right now. And he says it's not easy to impress Sandman, but he said I seem to have done it. But I'll see when I take a look at his review later on. He told me about it, but I wanted to try to focus mostly. I haven't looked at it yet because I've been so busy. I don't think To Catch a Predator is funny, but I'm going to get back to the SJW stuff. But when it comes down to the SJW Comic Pro, they wind up going out here and they alienate people. They go out here and they make people mad at them. They go out here and they think that they're building controversy and generating controversy, but controversy doesn't generate sales. I mean, I can think of many books by celebrities that wound up falling off right after they came out here with a lot of controversy. And I can think of the greatest disaster of all, which was just like Second Coming, the O.J. Simpson book, If I Did It. Now, when I think about SJW books that show how, this marketing plan of controversy and generating controversy fail, I think of Second Coming. Second Coming, which was a book designed to talk about how Jesus was some sort of bumbling, stumbling person coming back to earth. That was an insult to many people. And this book had over 200,000 signatures against it. And this book, even before the first issue was published, was generating so much controversy that it looked like they were just getting ready. It was about to put the nail in the coffin for DC Comics, because if the press had come out on this book, it would have completely collapsed DC Comics, because 200,000 signatures on a petition is more than the entire sales of the entire DC catalog in 1 month. So they were getting ready to put a nail in the coffin for themselves. And Dan Dido was literally terrified because he had an If I Did It situation getting ready to happen to DC Comics. So they had to go out here and mitigate the loss by giving the rights back to the creators and then canceling the book. So DC took a big loss because these SJWs, they wanted to generate controversy instead of focusing on generating sales. So I'm going to read some more of the comments. Tim Scott says he's going to look at my work. Yeah, right. YouTube is not a complete picture. It's just me. I do the live streams because a lot of my readers ask me to do them, and it's a way for me to connect with my readers and form a relationship with them. And it's also a way that I go out here and sell my work. So this whole live stream is about me forming a relationship with my readers and getting people interested in the whole process. I want to get people actively engaged in reading. I want them to learn more about writing. And I want them to understand the whole process of storytelling. And that's one of the reasons why I do these live streams. It's sort of like me teaching a class, but one of the things you can do after you watch the live stream is go out and buy the books. And that's how you can get a real assessment of my work. And a lot of people, after they watch the live stream, they go out and buy the books and they get an assessment of my work. Luciano Casanova, I'm going to look at see where your question was at the beginning of the stream. Let me see. Okay, I don't see it. I'm gonna need you to write it again. You don't have to rewind the comment section. All you have to do is just write it in, and I'll try to answer it. I mean, this live stream it's been going very well. So I've been very trying to get so many things about it, especially related to these SJW comics, and I want people to understand why they don't work. And again, the marketing approaches they use, they just don't work. They wind up turning you away from comics. He asks, why is a straight minority male being opted out of the oppression hierarchy? And the reason for that is because SJW books are primarily gynocentric. Now, you have to understand that the people who are coming into comics today, they are primarily white females. And these white females, they have this idea that comics have too many white males in them. And usually when it comes down to these white females, a lot of them, they have racist views regarding Black men, especially heterosexual Black men. And that's why they try to push them out of the diversity narrative. Because when it comes down to these white females, they don't want to have a Black man in the story because they're uncomfortable with Black men, and they're uncomfortable with the idea of a straight Black man. Because when it comes down to the SJW, the whole idea of a heterosexual Black man is just like the old racist white females out here who think of heterosexual Black men primarily as sexual deviants and rapists. And that's reflected in their work. Again, when it comes down to the SJW Comic Pro, they're primarily white females, and they are all about elevating minority females, but they don't want to elevate heterosexual males. And they don't like the idea of a heterosexual male coming in because the heterosexual male may supplant them and become more popular than them. And the other part about it is that the heterosexual male may be considered, again, more attractive to them. And the whole idea is, again, these are all fantasies of these white women. So they don't see a Black man as being part of their world. So that's another part of these SJWs. They're really racist, and especially against Black heterosexual men. And that's one of the reasons why they always put these lesbians in the story, because they figure they can mark the check boxes as related to your Black and homosexual in the same box. So that's what they want to do with that by checking that box. And it makes them where they can say, oh, we got a Black woman in here who's a lesbian, so I don't have to worry about this Black man being here because I've met the diversity check boxes. And straight Black males, that's something that really scare SJWs because they don't really feel comfortable around straight Black men. Now, Luciano makes a good point. He says, if they're promoting bigotry against straight men of color, then what's the point of calling them an anti-racist? But that's the whole thing with the SJW. They're hypocrites. They're not about real diversity. They're about putting on this semblance and this facade that says that they are about diversity, but it's only about those who fit within the smooth world. As long as you fit into the smooth world, they have no problem with you. And heterosexual Black men don't fit into their world. Now, if you look at Bendis's Iron Man, we saw that with the death of Jim Rhodes. They made sure to get rid of Jim Rhodes, and that's why they have emasculated Luke Cage, because if you look at the Luke Cage books, they completely cucked him. And if you look at Blade, they made him a delivery man. So basically, these white women are making these Black heroes fit within their view of the world, and in their view of the world, they don't see Black men as leaders, and they don't see Black men as somebody that needs to be seen in their story. So they want to see your Black man, just like they see them in their world, as delivery boys or completely cucked beta males. And that's not who Luke Cage or Blade was. What's up, O'Meal? O'Meal's one of my regular viewers, and he comes in and watch my channel every day. And I remember watching that. Yeah, the guy from Red Bank talks about this. Yeah, I remember Diversity in Comics doing that video talking about how they made Blade a delivery man in a sweater. And again, that goes back to white females' discomfort with heterosexual Black men. When it comes down to a lot of white females, they have this view that Black men are these brutes or these monsters. And they want to try to create, again, the Gordon Goodbrother image where they asexualize and desexualize the Black man, and they demasculinize the Black man so that they can fit into their smooth world. And that's why you have Blade as a delivery man. That's why you have Luke Cage as this cucked baby daddy. And that's why you have Black men presented as complete wimps. And again, it shows the hypocrisy of many of the SJWs in comics, and that they don't want us to see strong masculine images of heterosexual black men, because that's what I mean when I talk about the gynocentrism infiltrating comics, because SJWs are all about pushing a gynocentric narrative. Rabis asks, is Aqualad a part of that? Yeah, I would say he was a part of that, because what they do is, another thing in addition to emasculating a black man, is they will either effeminize a black man or they will homosexualize a black man. And that, again, is to make that man comfortable for white women. I remember that issue of Supergirl where they had the non-binary character, and I could see the racism right there in that comic. So you have Supergirl, the ideal white girl, and in order for her to have a story with a black male character, they go out here and make the black male character completely non-binary. And when they did that, they showed how racist they were. Just like on the TV show Supergirl, they turned James Olsen into the guardian of the friend zone because they wanted to go out here and not promote the interracial relationship they were originally planning. So oftentimes, this is what they do to black men, straight black men on TV, and that's what they do to black men in general. They don't want you to see black masculinity and black sexuality. They want to find a way to neuter it because white women are uncomfortable with it. And some of the white men, the more beta white men, are also uncomfortable because they have this idea in their head that if we show you this masculine black man, that he's going to lust after the white woman, when in most cases, black men just don't care about white women, because most black men, we're looking at other sisters, and we don't even have to look at women at work. We can see sisters on the street anywhere we go. Lightning Fan says that she gets pissed off when people look at her as a lesbian, just like they're stereotyped black men. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. I know a lot of goth girls who they like sports, gaming, and stuff like that. And they're not lesbians. I know a lot of heterosexual goths that are online right now, and it's just wrong to do that, because girls can like video games, girls can like action figures, girls can like nerd stuff. I mean, even when I'm writing characters, I often put that into a lot of the heroines that I do, that they're into computers, that they're into stuff like that. Isis herself is a tomboy who's into a lot of athletic stuff. She's into martial arts, and Esteem is into a lot of other technical stuff. So I don't see that as a lesbian thing. I see it as a normal thing, as something normal girls get into, and that's just part of just being a girl these days. They're into things like computers. They're into things like sports. They're into games, and that's just part of being a normal girl. So I don't think of it as something lesbian, and I think that people need to get out of that stereotype, because that's a thing that's just wrong. And I saw that in Unstoppable Wasp. They wanted to make, you make the smart black girl gay, and that's another insult, because I know plenty of straight heterosexual normal girls who are into stuff. Yeah, but that's just part of it. George Rogers asks, why are SJWs do these oppression competitions in the first place? Well, they do them because they want to have their smooth world. And when it comes down to the SJW, they want to be at the top of the smooth world. And as long as there are people at the bottom, they're below them, they feel like they're safe and comfortable in their world. Now, I don't know where an autistic straight white male would fit in there, but I always know that the black man and the black woman are at the bottom. So whenever it comes down to the SJW, they always want to create a pecking order. And when that pecking order, they have no place for the white man, but they have the white female. And then after that, you have all these other females. And then you have the beta male, beta white males. And then you have a bunch of Asians, Hispanics, and then finally at the bottom, you'll have the black man and the black woman. So that's when it comes down to these. That's why they have these oppression competitions, because they want to see this pecking order. And then they also want to socially engineer this pecking order as the social norm for everybody to follow. So, well, Muslims are on higher levels up there. They're like right below the white, they're like below the beta white males, because when it comes down to the SJW, they have this, like, they have a pecking order. So I don't really know the complete pecking order, but again, no, I know that the black man is at the bottom as it relates to this white female and their gynocentric pecking order. So that Muslims are in there, but I don't know where they are. But they want their smooth world, and they need people to be in their place in order for them to feel comfortable. So that's why they need for you to be this asexual Gordon Goodbrother black man, or they need you to be this beta emasculated white male, or they want you to be this fat black woman, because they don't want any of these people to compete with them. They don't want any of these people to challenge them, and they don't want any of these people to be what they aren't and not fit their narrative. Because when it comes down to your SJW, they want a world where everybody, there is diversity, but those people can only be diverse as long as they fit into their boxes. So it's something I talked about, in my novel Spellbound, where I talk about the darker shade of black. And they don't like people who are the darker shade of black. They want you to be the thug gangster, or the Gordon Goodbrother, or the mammy, or the Asian guy who works in the Chinese restaurant or the laundry, or the Hispanic guy working in the bodega. They don't want you to be a person who is outside of your box, because if you're outside of your box, that makes the SJW extremely uncomfortable. So if you're a black goth, that's something that makes them uncomfortable. If you're a guy who's into, let's say, you're a black guy and you can't play basketball, that makes them uncomfortable. And if you're an Asian person and you're a guy who has good social skills and you're like a guy who can get the girls, that makes them uncomfortable. So their idea of a character has to fit within these boxes. That's what something Richard C. Meyer talks about. You have to meet the check boxes in order to make them feel comfortable. And if you don't fit into the check boxes, they don't want anything to do with you. It's like you just don't fit into their boxes. And that's something that they don't want you to see. They want you to see the people who they create, and they want you to see people who fit into their boxes. So that's a minority for them. It's not a black person who is somebody who worked on the merits to be what they want to be. It's somebody who they can who meets their ideas and fits their narrative. So that's the big problem with your SJWs. And that's why they come into cultures, because they're really the biggest racists in the room. And they are the ones who sit there and they want everybody to fit into these boxes so that their world can be safe. And they feel that if black people are at that bottom of that world, their world is at the place, because as long as black people are miserable and as long as they're at the bottom of the world, they feel absolutely comfortable about their place in the world. I may do that video next time, Rapper 1000. Right now I got R. Kelly on the docket, and I may do one about the Supreme Court drafting women in the military. And I'm sorry you had to go through that, Luciano, but that's what SJWs do. They don't really touch on things that are important. They only touch on things as related to their politics and their agenda. And they only touch on those things because they're related to their smooth world. I'm going to get ready to go in about 5 minutes. So I'm going to still try to finish up what I was talking about as related to the live stream and the SJWs. But when they come into comics, they really don't go out here and they don't want to create great comics. They don't want to tell great stories, and they don't want to really engage the reader and give them that great reading experience. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people like myself are going out here and creating comics on things like Indiegogo, is because we want readers to get that great reading experience. And this is something that you can't get in an SJW comic, because when it comes down to the SJW, everything with them is about promoting their politics. And then whenever you confront them, they come at you with the position of the victim. And they come to you with that position of the victim because they don't want to be held accountable and they don't want to take responsibility. And again, that comes from the gynocentric platform that these SJWs come from. And they oftentimes, they don't want you to, they want to take comics and use them as a propaganda platform to push their agenda. And that's one of the things that has led to comics plummeting in sales, is the fact that you have your SJWs out here. They're pushing these identity politics, and then nobody wants to sit there and read this because it's not a comic book. It's not telling a story. It's just saying, it's just preaching to people and shouting at them. And when you shout at people, again, it makes them defensive, and it doesn't give them any reason to go out here and buy these comics. So when I look at the SJW and their approaches to comics and their approaches to comic storytelling, what it does is it winds up alienating readers. And that's, again, why these sales are at all-time lows, because why should somebody spend their time reading a comic that is just propaganda? And why should people spend money on a comic that's propaganda when they have better entertainment options for their dollar out here? Many of those entertainment value options, they can get a higher value per dollar, are things like Netflix, things like Hulu, and things like books like I produce, like the ISIS series. You can get for the price of 2 comics, you can get one really great story for $8, like this ISIS All That Glitters, which is now available in paperback, and you can pre-order on Kindle. And this story for $8 will give you the story of 2 comic books, and it will be far more compelling than your comics that you get right now. Excuse me. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing the ISIS graphic novel Indiegogo, is because I want to give readers that great comic like I got back in the 80s at the newsstand and at the bodega back in the day. And I want to give that to you guys when I do this ISIS graphic novel Indiegogo that's coming on March 5th. And I really don't like all the identity politics that's going on in comics. And I want to give you guys a classic old school comic. Robbie's asked if is there any way to get signed books from me. Not yet right now, but I'm working on it. And I would love to do a Comic-Con soon. I just have to get my money up because those tables are really expensive. But I'm hoping that if I can go out here and get this Indiegogo funded, coming March 5th, I'll be able to do that soon in the future. But it's something I want to do. It's a goal that I'm setting. And until I can do that, I'm urging everybody to, go out here and support the SJS Direct books like ISIS All That Glitters, and books like Easting the Sands of Time, and, books like Bride of Dracula, The John Haynes, A Conversation with Death, and Escape from Transylvania, because every dollar you guys spend on my work, that enables me to build a larger platform for the SJS Direct imprint, and that allows me to reach more readers, and it allows me to go out here and do things like Comic-Cons in the future. Thank you, Benny G. Bill Wacko was the artist who designed the covers for ISIS and the Easting books, and Mike Williams did an amazing job on John Haynes, A Conversation with Death. I'm hoping to get Mike again for the John Haynes Dark Succubus, and I finally finished John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose, and the sample chapter is up on the blog. I'm hoping that you guys come back for the next live stream. I'm going to end this one right now. Thank you all for coming out to the live stream. And you can pick up all of the ISIS and Easting and John Haynes series books on Amazon.com by clicking the link in the description box. I'll answer one more question and I'm going to go. Luciano asked, do you think Black women are perpetrators and creators of many? I could say that they are, because they are the teachers of the culture and they support it. But but until next time, I'm urging everybody to go out and pick up the ISIS series books, especially All That Glitters, because then you get an insight into the story that's going to be in the Indiegogo graphic novel. This is a great book, and I urge you to pick it up on Amazon.com. I'm going to end the stream at this point. And yeah, I may do the next one about man crisis. I just have to think about it. I may do the next one on the man crisis. So thank you, Daryl Eiffel. I urge you, thank you all for coming to the live stream, and I hope you're there for the next one. And that one might be possibly about the man crisis.